Dark Secrets of the Kenyan Presidency, Part 3. Now, Jomo Kenyatta, the future president of Kenya, was sentenced on April 8, 1953. And it is very interesting that immediately Jomo went to jail, things started happening very fast on the political scene on the outside. Now, this could not have been of much interest to Jomo because clearly he was out of the political game, or so it seemed at that time. Now, the colonial government realized that after the violent uprising of the Land Freedom Party, the Land Freedom Movement, yes, in other better known as Mau Mau, they did not want the same thing to happen again. So it was clear to them that they would have to stem the tide of native political dissent. And one of the ways of doing this was to get African representatives in parliament. At that time it was called the Legislative Council, or LECO. This is what led to the very fascinating general elections countrywide of March 1957. Actually, those elections took place roughly 2 weeks after the dramatic hanging of somebody who the colonial government considered a terrorist, one Dedan Washihuri Kimathi. Now, 8 constituencies were created countrywide, okay, and these were filled immediately. They were filled by people who the colonial government had handpicked, carefully chosen, roughly from those 8 constituencies, which covered the whole country, okay. Now, naturally, these were people who were supposed to be loyal to the colonial government. People would not bring a lot of manenos, not political firebrands, obviously, Now, this was a clever political maneuver by the colonial government, the whole idea being to offer incumbents, there's the power of being an incumbent, in any election, to offer their choices as incumbents in those elections which took place in March 1957. Now, the colonialists obviously underestimated the Africans, in terms of their brain power. They thought the Africans are not very sharp, they are not very clever, and therefore it would be possible to get most of these leaders of their choices actually elected. But they were in for a very rude shock, okay. Now, one of their candidates lost because of the colonialists' own policies, Now, as you have seen before in this audiobook, the colonialists were very much against Kikuyus getting involved in politics, okay? And therefore, most of the electorate, most of the people who are registered voters to vote in those particular elections, there were very few Kikuyus. Most of them were non-Kikuyus, okay? So, in the case of a man called Eliud Madu, who was the incumbent, his opponent, a man called Bernard Mate, who hailed from the Meru community, sailed through simply because there were more Meru people registered as voters. But save for that case, all the others, most of the other seats, the colonialists were in for a rude shock. The hand-picked blue-eyed boys were voted out. With the exception of 2 particular constituencies, one of which will greatly interest you. The first one was James Muimi in Ukambani. James Muimi was elected, not re-elected, was elected. This is a man who had been handpicked by the colonialists, and he was elected back into office. He was elected into office by actual voters. And the other was another future president of the Republic of Kenya, a man by the name Daniel Arap Moi, who represented the Rift Valley. To be fair to Moi, the reason why he had been elected after being appointed by the Mzungus was because he had taken his job as a representative of Rift Valley very seriously. He was known to traverse right across the vast Rift Valley, talking to people, listening to the people's needs, and doing everything in his power to correct situations here and there. And therefore he became genuinely popular with the electorate. Now, kindly bear with me as I get into this politics. The reason is it's very important because you will not be able to understand how Jomo Kenyatta turned from jailbird to Prime Minister and then President of Kenya. Yeah, actually it was because of a personal animosity, yeah, among some members of this core, yeah, and actually a power struggle of some sort that handed over the presidency to Jomo Kenyatta. And therefore it is useful to understand a little bit about core politics at that time, so that we know how this happened. The other African elected leaders were Odinga, who represented Nyanza Central; Ronald Gala represented the coast; Lawrence Oguda, who represented Nyanza South. Yeah, this was Mboya's home area, Luo Nyanza, which covered areas like Rusinga Island, from where Mboya hailed from, and Masinde Muliro from Nyanza North. Oh, and of course Tom Mboya for Nairobi. Yeah. Now, because Nairobi results came out fast, Mboya was declared the winner. Yeah, those election results were announced before any of the other election results, and therefore Mboya has the distinction of being the first ever elected black African member of parliament. He achieved this at the very tender age of 27. He had won a very bruising battle in Nairobi against a man called Agwins Kodek, yeah, a lawyer, yeah, who had a practice in Nairobi, mostly defending Mau Mau suspects and many other Africans. Yeah, so he had gained a lot of popularity within Nairobi. But Mboya, with his maneuvers and his political smartness, managed to beat Agwins Kodek. Now, what this 27-year-old did next was really a game changer. Okay, because what he did after his, he had secured, he was sure that he had won. Yeah, he sat next to his radio, listening carefully for the results of the other 7 constituencies countrywide, and immediately a result came in, he would rush out and send a telegram. Yeah, the telegram was very simple. Obviously, those days there were no mobile phones. Yeah, a telegram was an urgent message you send out to somebody, and they would get it almost immediately. You did it at the post office. So what did the telegram say? It was actually an invite. First of all, actually started by congratulating them for winning, yeah, and then invited them to a meeting of African elected members of parliament to be held in Nairobi. Actually, a very urgent meeting. Okay. Now, the whole purpose of the meeting was to create a united front for the elected African members. Okay. So on that day, they formed the African Elected Members Organization. Yeah. And all 8, of course, were members of this brand new organization. Okay. And then the next thing, of course, was to elect the officials of this particular organization. Okay. Mboya was elected the secretary, and the oldest man amongst the group, one Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, was elected chairman. Now, Mboya emphasized to his colleagues that none of them was to accept a cabinet post. Yeah, because, you know, the Mzungu was well known for divide and rule tactics. Okay, so they all agreed none of them was going to accept any cabinet post, and that they would continue fighting for more representation within the LegCo, yeah, and ultimately independence for Kenya. Now, because of very clever posturing, to the outside world, the 8 leaders appeared very united. They appeared to speak in one voice. However, the truth is, during meetings and in the background, there were a lot of tensions and problems within these 8 elected members. And the biggest problem was between the chairman and the young secretary. Now, Jaramogi was a teacher by profession. He actually taught a high school called Maseno High School. Yeah, and being the older man, he looked at Mboya as a very arrogant young man in a very big hurry. Yeah, Mboya viewed Jaramogi as somebody who was a little slow in understanding what was going on politically, especially on the international scene, which was important and would impact on Kenya. Okay. Now, of course, Mboya, in sharp contrast to Jaramogi, was very exposed. Okay, he had already traveled outside the country. Yeah, he had very strong contacts outside the country, most notably with the United States of America. Yeah, And so it was hate at first sight. People were very often confused as to who the real leader of the African elected members was. Was it the chairman Jaramogi, or was it the person who always spoke at press conferences, Tom Mboya? And Mboya often did things that could not have gone down well with the chairman of the African elected members. For instance, immediately after they were sworn in as members of parliament, Tom Mboya walked straight to the seat which was reserved for leaders of the African members. The person who had sat there previously was Eliud Madu. Some would have thought that that particular seat would have been best suited to the chairman of the group, yeah, rather than the mayor secretary. Yeah, but actually in the real sense of the word, Mboya was actually the leader. Yeah, he's the one who had called the meeting. He's the one who had organized the unity. The first press statement which they had issued declaring that they would not accept any cabinet post was crafted by Mboya. Everything they did was organized and initiated by Tom Mboya. Thus began a very fierce political struggle between these two individuals that cost both of them the presidency of Kenya, yes, and cost Tom Mboya's life ultimately. Now Jaramogi came up with a plan, a political scheme, whose intention was to completely finish Mboya politically. Now this time things politically were changing very rapidly in the country, and although the Kikuyus had really been sat on politically, they were now emerging as a very important and indeed influential section of the electorate. Okay, so Jaramogi stood up one day in Parliament at the Leko, and he issued a statement that left everybody in shock. He told a hushed house that Africans were not prepared for independence until Jomo Kenyatta was released. Some members in the house said, Jomo who? Yeah, the guy had completely been forgotten. Now when it was realized which Jomo he was referring to, the house was appalled. Released the leader of a terrorist group? Because of course you know Jomo was convicted of being a leader, a member and a leader of the Mau Mau, yeah, who had decapitated several Mzungu settlers and Africans as well. Yeah, this was a member of a terror group. Release him? No way. Yeah, and the colonial government responded very quickly by saying there was no way Jomo Kenyatta was going to be released. Yes, and that was that. Okay, but of course Mboya read the politics very quickly. Yes, because things were changing, and independence was just around the corner. And of course the image of Mau Mau would dramatically change with independence, from that of a terrorist group to one of the groups that had battled the colonial government, yeah, indirectly leading to the chance for Kenya to be independent. And so Mboya's counter move was very interesting. He rushed to Kapenguria, yeah, visited Jomo Kenyatta, had a lot of photographs taken with Jomo Kenyatta. The whole idea was to give the impression that Mboya and Kenyatta were already very close. In fact, due to Mboya's clever maneuvering, the impression that came out was that Mboya was much closer to Kenyatta than Jaramogi was. Yeah, but actually the truth is, Jaramogi was not really, at that point in time, was not really a friend of Jomo. He just used Jomo as a political maneuver to deal with his political enemy. The effect of all this is that the limelight shifted very quickly to Jomo Kenyatta. Yeah, somebody who had been in the Mzungu prison, okay, and suddenly he started looking like some hero of the freedom struggle. Yeah, somebody who had been jailed because of the freedom struggle. Yeah, now we all know from the previous part that Jomo had no hand, was not a member of the Mau Mau, was not involved in any way with it. And in fact, Mau Mau disliked Jomo a lot and issued several death threats, yeah, to him, okay, because they labeled him a collaborator with the evil colonial regime. And this is precisely what gave legs to the lies, blatant lies, peddled by State House for many years, in later years for very many years. And that lie was that Jomo Kenyatta fought violently for independence. Yeah, he risked his life. He was a member of the Mau Mau battling the colonial government. Yes, he was radically against the colonial government. And as a result of his efforts, Kenya had won independence. And you'll find that that is what our kids are still being taught in school. Not true. Yeah, just know from today that is absolutely not true. And so as Kenya hurtled towards independence, yeah, the person to lead Kenya into independence was not the widely expected Tom Mboya, okay, and neither was it Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Yeah, it was actually a compromise candidate of the two, Jomo Kenyatta. Was it fate and destiny pushing Jomo towards the presidency? Yeah, or was it the fulfillment of the prophecy of a man called Kungu wa Magana? Or perhaps it was just lady luck. Yeah, after years of having so much frustration in his life, Lady Luck decided to give Jomo Kenyatta a break. Yeah, I don't know what you'll think it is, but the long and short of it is that Jomo Kenyatta ended up as Prime Minister and later on President of the brand new Republic of Kenya. That is precisely how it happened. But then, you know, this is politics. One would have expected, for instance, that Jaramogi Oginga Odinga would always be at Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's side. Yeah, he owed his presidency to the man called Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. That is very clear from what we've already seen. One would have thought that the very influential, yeah, and very smart politician called Tom Mboya would also have been very close to Jomo, yeah, several years after independence. After all, without his massive support, Jomo would have found it hard to make it to president, yeah, and even after he became president, the support that came from Mboya, who was very much aware of the situation. I mean, Jomo had to do some catching up after spending so many years in prison, and Mboya was the one who did helped him do a lot of that catching up, yeah. So the truth is that Jomo also owed Tom Mboya, yeah. But then, as I said, this is politics, and what ended up happening is that the government of Jomo Kenyatta saw these two gentlemen who had so gallantly been on the forefront of fighting for independence, especially at the last stages, as enemies, as threats to his seat, threats to the presidency. And both of them had to be dealt with very, very ruthlessly. Yeah, that's actually what ended up happening, as we shall learn from the other sections in this amazing audiobook. Now, amazingly, history repeated itself again when it came to choosing the second president of Kenya. Now, it is very, very fascinating that in an article Time magazine did, trying to predict who would take over from the presidency from Jomo Kenyatta, the name of Moi did not feature. The front runners were all members of the dreaded Kiambu Mafia. Names like Mbiu Kwenange, very close to the Jomo Kenyatta, and Dr. Njoroge Mungai, who was actually a nephew related to Jomo Kenyatta. He was a nephew of Jomo Kenyatta. Yeah, those were seen as the two front runners to be the second president of Kenya. But again, what happened was that the person who ended up being president was a compromise candidate, Daniel Toroitich arap Moi. Yeah. Now there are many in the inner circle, Kiambu Mafia inner circle, who saw Moi as a passing cloud. Yeah, a compromise president, temporary president. Yeah, that once they got organized, they would take over the presidency, which rightfully belonged to them, or so they thought. Yeah, it never happened, and Moi ended up ruling the country for 24 long years. In the run-up to the 2002 elections, yeah, the public was very concerned about who would actually, who amongst the many opposition leaders would be fronted as a presidential candidate for the then opposition against Moi's KANU. Yeah, and of course that time Moi fielded Uhuru Kenyatta as the candidate for KANU. A decision that caused all the people who were gunning to take over from Moi to actually defect from KANU to the opposition. These were people like Vice President Professor George Saitoti, people like Kalonzo Musyoka, yeah, and many others. They just defected to the opposition. And therefore, Kenyans were very worried that the opposition would actually break, because the chances were they would not be able to agree on one particular candidate to stand for president. There are those who even suggested elections, yeah, so that they actually elect the most popular amongst them to represent the then opposition, National Rainbow Coalition. But then at a very memorable meeting at Uhuru Park, Raila Odinga stood up, yeah, just like his father had done several decades earlier, yeah, and he uttered the words Kibaki Tosha, yeah. In other words, what he was saying, so many people want the presidency, but let's compromise on Mwai Kibaki. Now, Raila Odinga did not do this because of his love for Mwai Kibaki as a person, or because he thought he was the most qualified. He simply did this as a clever political maneuver. The whole purpose was to neutralize the influential Kikuyu vote, okay? And his plan worked, and Mwai Kibaki became president. In 2013, Mwai Kibaki was very determined that to hand over the presidency to a man called Musalia Mudavadi. All the plans to ensure that Musalia Mudavadi would be elected were in place, including one very crucial component, which was that Uhuru Kenyatta was supposed to rally the Kikuyu vote behind the Musalia Mudavadi presidency. And then William Ruto came along, and he realized that it would be very difficult for him to escape the charges which he was facing at that time at the ICC, unless he was able to call the shots in the coming next government. And he approached Uhuru Kenyatta, and the two defied Mwai Kibaki, yeah. And in the end, again, the Kenyan president was a compromise candidate in the name of Uhuru Kenyatta. The person who has ended up as president of the Republic of Kenya has always been an unexpected compromise candidate, and history has repeated itself like clockwork. We of course wait to see if this trend will change in the future. In fact, all indications are that it will actually change, yes, but we wait to see, okay? Now, in the next chapter of this audio book, we will look a bit closer, much more closely, into the Jomo Kenyatta administration, yeah, and I'm going to reveal a lot of things you never knew about that particular administration and the impact it had in the country in general, okay? See you in the next episode. This is Chris Kumekucha.